Okay, welcome back to members of 121 Community Church in Grapevine, Texas, and to our ongoing study in Pannenberg and Volume 1 of his Systematic Theology. Take a look at pages 17 to 26. We're going to take a look at the birth of Christian dogmatics. Let's go to block 1. We'll take a look at the three ways of understanding the Christian concept of dogmatics. Dogmatics is a theological discipline. It presents the content of church teaching, and it does address the truth of dogma. It is a theological discipline that first emerged in the 17th century. However, in the 1550, Melanchthon, the reformer and friend of Martin Luther, he did use that term of dogmatics for the content of testimony in Scripture. So block 1, note 2, dogmatics as the content of testimony in Scripture. Gerhard in 1610 divided the content of Scripture into the dogmatic and the historical. And then in 1635, Johann Altino made a distinction between theological dogmatics and historical theology. From the 17th century on, dogmatics has come to represent the doctrinal content of Christian theology. It is the doctrinal content of Christian theology. It is the comprehensive exposition of the Christian faith. In the New Testament, the concept didaskalia is used for the apostolic teaching. That's basically dogmatics. So the Greek term is didaskalia. If you go to John 7:16, Jesus answered them, "My doctrine, didake, is not mine, but his that sent me." So Christ uses the term didake or didaskalia for Christian doctrine or new covenant doctrine. And that's it's been a formal role of systematic theology ever since the 17th century and forward. So let's go to block 2. And we're going to look at the age of Scholasticism because probably the first really major work of dogmatics would have to be Thomas Aquinas. And I've got 3 volumes of his work. I've got 10 volumes of Karl Barth's Church Dogmatics, but I've got 3 volumes of Thomas Aquinas and his Summa Theologia. Let's go to block 2. Dogmatics in the age of Scholasticism and the elevation of human reasoning, and Aquinas and his masterpiece, the Summa Theologia. The age of Scholasticism began from the 12th to the 14th century. Truth was understood as coherence in a twofold way: the rational interrelation of the parts of Christian doctrine and the rational relationship of Christian doctrine to other forms of knowledge. And then the question was asked, how does dogmatics fit in this age of scientific inquiry? It was posited that faith has a biblical basis, and the faculty of reason is to explain this presupposed truth. So the age of Scholasticism elevated the faculty of human reason, and believers or theologians were to rationally exposit and explain the proposed and presupposed truth of Christian doctrine in the Scriptures. Now, block 2, note 2, the dogmatics of Thomas Aquinas, 1225 to 1274, and his masterpiece, the Summa Theologia. The articles of faith are a truth as the result of systematic theological presentation. It's originally communicated by God's revelation, and Aquinas posited the rational reconstruction of the truth of faith. He took the truth of faith. I'll tell you what he did. Aquinas took the truth of faith, and then he loved the Greek philosopher Aristotle. So Aquinas took the truth of faith in Scripture, and then he combined it together with his appreciation of Aristotle and his philosophical work and his philosophical logic, and then he created his systematic theological presentation of Christian doctrine. That is what Aquinas did. Aquinas combined revelatory truth and Greek Aristotelian philosophy. He really loved Aristotle and did combine Scripture and Aristotle to theologically represent Christian doctrine. And a practical verification must complement the theoretical, said Aquinas. Traditional truth means to adopt and then rationally explain presupposed revelatory truth. That's what he did. We adopt and then rationally explain the presupposed revelatory truth in Scripture, and in that way we construct a systematic presentation of doctrine. And if you ever study Aquinas, he is extremely systematic. I mean, it's overly systematic, but that's the two greatest works of dogmatics that we have are Thomas Aquinas and Karl Barth. I've got 10 volumes of Karl Barth's dogmatics, and they are tremendous, and everybody recognizes it's a tremendous work of theological scholarship. But Aquinas also, Thomas Aquinas, is Summa Theologia. I have 3 volumes of Aquinas, and again, tremendous scholarly work in Christian doctrine. Let's go to block 3. So what we want to take away from block 2 is primarily the fact that Scholasticism from the 12th to the 14th century had as its bright and shining star Thomas Aquinas, who lived briefly, 1225 to 1274, and he wrote a masterpiece of Christian theology and Christian doctrine called the Summa Theologia. And Thomas Aquinas, I truly recommend him to everyone. I mean, you should get at least some Thomas Aquinas work for your library. You should at least have some in your theological library. So, we looked at the birth of dogmatics. In block 1, we looked at the first shining star of dogmatics in Thomas Aquinas in block 2. Let's go to block 3, and we look at the epistemology for the practice of church dogmatics. What's the methodology of writing in a rational way an exposition of Christian doctrine? 1. Objective truth always precedes subjective insight. It is the foundation of our concept formation. The process of acquiring truth seeks to determine the actual truth through a formation of judgment, and we try to form a rational viewpoint of correspondence to the revelatory truth of Scripture. So it's correspondence. We're seeking correspondence and coherence with the revelatory truth. 2. Absolute revelation is the priority of epistemology. Theology is a discipline always under authority, which is the priority of divine truth over all human opinion. Dogmatics must be founded on the priority of divine revelatory truth, period. Scholasticism identified concerns involved here. So 3, the priority of divine revelation plus a worldview that sought to build a viewpoint of correspondence to the revealed truth brought about an authentic dogmatics of scholasticism, especially in the work of Thomas Aquinas in the 1200s. First axiom: we profess the authority of the biblical text. Second axiom: the act of faith must be oriented toward God in the work of dogmatics. We must reach a credibility for the authority of Scripture. For Augustine, 354 to 439, it is the Church that establishes the criteria for the credibility of the authority of Scripture. In our church, when you look at our fundamental core values of 121, the first fundamental core value of our fellowship, of our church, is the authority of Scripture, period. That's it. If you fail in that area, all doctrine fails. That is the foundational, prioritized core value that a faith and church worship must hold. And our church does. The first and foundational and fundamental core value of the beliefs of our fellowship at 121 is the authority of Scripture. Now, I probably take that a little bit further than most people in our fellowship, but maybe not. I'm Southern Baptist. I believe in the inerrancy of Scripture, and I'm not going to get into a big explanation of that, but that'd be a whole new lesson. But I'm a conservative evangelical, and spend most of my time in the Southern Baptist Convention, and I believe in the authority of Scripture and the inerrancy of Scripture. So I have a very, very conservative take on that foundational truth. But this is an interesting lesson. I like the fact that Pannenberg really did show us that the 1200s is really when we had the first, block 2 is kind of the key to the lesson. Scholasticism was kind of the beginning where we actually saw the birth of a Christian doctrine as church dogmatics. That's when it really started to emerge. And I love the fact that Pannenberg did not hold back. And he lifted up the Catholic theologian, Thomas Aquinas, and I'm glad he did. Now, Pannenberg was a member of the Confessing Church in Germany, the church more or less founded by Barth and Bonhoeffer in opposition to the Nazi regime. And Pannenberg was a member of the Confessing Church. Moltmann and Pannenberg both were members of the Confessing Church. Moltmann never liked to be called a Lutheran. He said, everybody assumes that Germans are Lutheran. He said, I'm not Lutheran. I'm a member of the Confessing Church. And so was Pannenberg. But I love the fact that even though that is his stance, and he was a student of Karl Barth and Karl Barth's neo-orthodoxy, he does rightly, and he's justified in doing so, he lifts up the contribution of Thomas Aquinas, the Catholic theologian. And I strongly recommend Thomas Aquinas. 1225 to 1274, he wrote his masterpiece was the Summa Theologia. It's called the Summa Theologia, a multi-volume work, tremendous work of Christian church dogmatics. I have 3 volumes that I wanted to concentrate on. I wanted some of his work. I have 3 volumes of the Summa Theologia. I really concentrated on Barth. I have 10 volumes of Barth's church dogmatics, but I do have 3 of the dogmatics of Thomas Aquinas as well. So it's very powerful. I'm glad that